cloud, and he was eradicating. You see the cloud actually being wiped away by this cloudbuster. And inside the cloud was this flying saucer. And they were pointing the antenna, which is basically what this thing was, at the saucer, and the saucer just started going down, and it went down, and they got excited and took off running, and somebody knocked over the camera, and that was the end of the film. But I actually saw that at a theater, and I was really surprised at...
And how do you feel it got into the theater in the first place?
Oh, I think they filmed it, they boxed it up, they shipped it out before the government even knew the film existed, and by that time people had already seen it, but you'll never see it again. Certainly they retrieved that
They
film.
didn't have that kind of electronic intelligence that they have now.
Now you can't do anything like that and get away with it. It goes through the postal, and they scan it. Mm-hmm. They can scan letters. They use microwaves. They scan everything in the letter. Even though it's folded up, the microwave device actually unfolds the letter, reads it.
How about that?
Even in foreign languages.
You don't see that on the Discovery Channel.
And they scan it for certain words and stuff, and that technology was in existence in 1969. And the microwave can distinguish between different layers of paper, you see, and then unfold the whole thing. This all happens in nanoseconds, you know. And meanwhile, in 1957, the U.S. Air Force had a scanner that could scan Pravda, translate it, and print it out in English in 2 hours, 1957.
And it becomes the L.A. Times.
Yeah. Yeah. And how could they do that in 1957 when
That's
the
pretty
public
impressive,
didn't have that technology until about 5 years ago, you know?
That's right. Of
So
course, it goes back to what we were saying about...
technology theft and concealment.
Right. Getting back to World War II briefly, just to finish up, of course, if we are to take into account a stalemate between the Nazis and the Americans at this point, what are we to believe about our old nemesis, Adolf Hitler? You make some claims about him.
Well, people have taken me to task on it, but I honestly don't believe anybody could look that much like Hitler as the man I saw in San Antonio in 1967.
Explain that a little.
And, well, I was selling paintings with my friend on the San Antonio River. I was sitting in the amphitheater. The Arneson River Theater was just across the San Antonio River. And I looked down the walk, and there came a man and a woman. The man was wearing a suit that was a kind of a raw umber color. And... or rather, yeah, it was raw. It was a yellowish mustard color, which was one of Hitler's favorite colors, by the way. And I could see that surgery, I could see marks on his face that surgery had been done here, but it didn't affect it. He still looked like who he was. And he was limping, and his pants were too short. That was another thing. He had a habit of wearing his pants too short. And the woman with him had dancer's legs, and she had red hair, and she was a little taller than him. And they came down the walk, and I said, just before this, though, there had been a couple of guys in suits who came up there and went through where we were and talked to us, engaged us in conversation. And they were both electrical engineers from Kassel, Germany.
Huh.
And I thought, well, this is interesting. So then these German engineers went on by and then looked down there, and I nudged my friend and I said, look who's coming down the walk. And he said, oh my God. I didn't even have to say. He knew who it was. And I said, look who's coming down the walk, you know. And I said, I didn't want to attract too much attention. I had on sunglasses, and I said, he's going to pick up that painting right there. And I knew he was going to pick up that painting, and he did pick it up. And then all of a sudden, these German, quote, engineers got his attention, and then he looked up, and he went, and he put the painting down, and they hustled off.
And then what year was this? What year?
1967, when Hemisphere opened.
Oh, interesting.
And then a couple of more, quote, engineers, electrical engineers from Kassel, Germany again, came by and debriefed us and went on with the entourage.
Must have been some kind of tour bus let off there.
Yeah, Hitler was visiting his relatives in Fredericksburg. He had relatives there. He had an uncle there. He had other relatives, yeah.
That's
and as his old uncle told my uncle, he said, ach, und dat Adolf always was a troublemaker.
Yeah, Yeah, that's the understatement of the century. Now, you want to explain to us your contention about how Hitler might have escaped? You know, because everybody's bringing up these ideas about bone sample, you know, his teeth, his skull, you know,
we
he
had
shot
the
himself.
intelligence photos that the Russians furnished us right in our library when I was in Air Force Intelligence. And they had a picture of the guy they were saying was Hitler, and he was shot in the head, and he had attached earlobes. He looked just like Hitler, but he had attached earlobes. And I said, that's not Hitler. And these guys said, you know, that worked with us, said, why not? I said, look at his earlobes. He's got attached earlobes.
Yeah. It's
And then,
well known that Hitler had over 100 body doubles for
yeah,
all different purposes.
Yeah, he had 5 main alphas, and they would often be in the parades, and they're not even sure that some of them didn't give some of the speeches that he supposedly gave.
That would be interesting.
And that way he could be in more places at the same time, too. You know?
Sure, that would be a media
everybody could say they
stunt.
met the Fuhrer and touched him and stuff, you know. The thing about it is, here was 4 or 5 bodies that looked like Hitler found around the bunker. When you know,
why is that when Hitler, if you got 5 of these
what do you
characters?
need so many lookalikes dead, you know? Now, the body that they claimed was Hitler that was burned, okay, that was Goebbels and his wife. They never found Goebbels' body. They never found his wife's body. They found all his children's body in the bunker, all dead.
Now, here's an
But
interesting...
why didn't they find Goebbels or his wife's bodies? Because they were the ones that were burned, and you can take one look at that corpse and know it's Goebbels. You got that Egyptian beak nose, you know, and you know, and it's not Hitler, you know. And
I'd like to get to Hitler's escape. This is an interesting contention about Hanno Reich. Explain that to us about how this was, because, see, the reason I'm interested in this is that if you look at the conventional literature about the fall of Berlin, it will tell you that there were hundreds of airlifts being, you know, going in and out of there, even while the place was burning down. Are we to believe that Hitler was so insane he wouldn't, you know, hey, let's take a ride in a plane, let's get out of here?
if that was
but
Hitler's
went
body
little-
they
you went a
found, the
little
Russians
further.
could produce the DNA evidence to prove it, because they
Sure.
took those bodies to Russia.
Yeah, but
And-
you went a little further with your with how you felt he escaped.
They had a pad built on top of the bunker, and it had direct access from Hitler's room on the very bottom. And all he had to do was go right straight up a set of stairs to the top, and there was a pad, a landing pad that could only be used by a helicopter or flying saucer. And they had one of the top test pilots, Hanno Reich, along with Hans Ulrich Rudel. Now, Rudel was considered to be the successor to Hitler. And, I don't know whether you ever saw his combat record. Are you
Not
familiar with it?
personally, no.
Fantastic, unbelievable. He personally destroyed, on the Russian front, over 300 Russian tanks.
Holy smokes!
He had a missing arm, and he managed to fly this way. I mean, he just couldn't be stopped. Hitler tried to get him to come back to Berlin, and he refused. Right to his face, he refused, and then Hitler gave in and said, "Go ahead, you know, a real warrior, you know." So he went back and fought to the very end. But here's Rudel in Berlin, visiting with Hitler along with Hanno Reich. There was two of the top pilots. I mean, this guy Rudel was phenomenal.
Absolutely, this again
He was
is
shot down 38 times.
That's
And
impressive. Again, this is in the open literature about Hanno Reich, for instance, was in the bunker. I mean, you have one of the premier pilots of Germany with Hitler.
and the Russians admitted they didn't get Hitler's body, although they're still squabbling back and forth about it. You know, they had so much as admitted, and boy, Stalin really wanted to get him, and but supposedly they didn't get Hitler's body, and so my theory is that Hitler was provided with a comfortable place in Kassel, Germany, for the rest of his life.
Why not?
And,
Why not?
beautiful area, and the site of the monument to the Holocaust. What better place to live, you know? And plus, I met people who were friends with Adolf Hitler. I met a man who was this was really odd that this guy popped up when he did, but when I was coming back from Europe in 1975, a man approached me at the La Fonda in Santa Fe and told me that he was a good friend. I don't know why. Why did he do this? You know, it was the CIA. The CIA at that time was trying to hire me. So this guy shows up and he said, I've been a lifelong friend of Adolf Hitler, and I've lived in Bavaria since 1938. And I'm on my way back there. And he was an American, and but he was among Hitler's personal friends. And so I thought, well, this is really odd, you know. How is it that this guy approaches me and
how do you feel
tells me that? Huh?
How do you have
It was part of the CIA thing.
So you feel that
it was a CIA thing, you know. It's like when I went to Italy, okay.
Kind of to drop you a line, just
It's
to
like
mess
when
with
I went to the port of Naples, okay. I had my baggage. I got off of this Yugoslavian freighter, and I got ready to go through customs, and the Italian customs man said, "You're a very famous man, Mr. Lyne. You can go right on through."
Wow.
And
How about that?
so then when I got to Rome, at the railway station in Rome, after I got off the train, this old mafioso guy approaches me and said, "I love America. I would very much like to come back to America if the government ever permits me. But I'm here to tell you that you are protected. If you ever need help, my room is there in that building. Just ask for me." And I don't remember his name, but he looked like somebody like old Lucky Luciano or somebody, you know. Wow. Of course, Lucky was killed, but he was an old mafia guy who had been kicked out of the country, and he was working for the CIA to work his way back, you know. And he wanted me to know that I had protection, and that was your CIA. That was your George Bush. You
Sure,
know,
I would assume they would know your movements in and out of
it
cities.
was horrible.
Anybody's
I couldn't get away
movements.
from them. They tried to get me at work in the movie industry there. They tried to get me to infiltrate German terrorist groups. There was all kinds of stuff going on. These were like people that worked for Time Life.
And this is because of your family connections that
It was because of George Bush and the CIA, you know. I mean, my first cousin was Bush's secretary for 5 years, but my first in-laws apparently were big buddies with the Bushes. And Bush had just decided that I was going to be one of his people, and I don't know, maybe I'd have ended up being Secretary of Defense if I'd have said yes. But I wouldn't have any part of it. Boy, they don't like no for an answer. But it was just the weirdest bunch of stuff you ever saw, and I couldn't get away from it. They were everywhere. I realized that I was surrounded by all these intelligence spooks and stuff when I was in.
they like to keep to their own. So
Yeah, they were actually, even though they were posing as all sorts of stuff, you know, actors and so forth, but they were all on part of it.
art students.
Yeah.
Right.
There weren't any art students. The art thing had really burned out in Germany. But, yeah, I could go on and on about that. I don't want to blow the cover on some of these people. They're nice people, but they're
mixed up with
bad
stuff.
Bad circles. You know, you can't lie down with dogs without getting up with fleas. The way
Absolutely.
I look at it.
Absolutely.
I'd like to thank Mr. Lyne for being our guest on the 33rd Parallel. I hope there are many who feel as I do, that it's a good and healthy thing to entertain alternative views on items of such importance as our world history and scientific progress. This is, in fact, the primary objective of this video series. I hope you found it worthwhile, and remember, a good conspiracy depends on your cooperation. Thank you.
A companion guide to the 33rd Parallel video series will soon be available. Look for it on our website at www.flyingsaucerfactory.com. Also available now from the Flying Saucer Factory, a German U-boat on the United States coastline, a secret agreement between sworn enemies, an underground base built into the permafrost of Antarctica, Rear Admiral Byrd and his armada of 4,000 men in a confrontation with unknown aircraft that can fly from pole to pole in a matter of minutes. When reading about it isn't enough, it's time to see what you've been missing. a graphic dramatization